Welcome to the Sleep Charming podcast, the podcast where I help you drift off for a good night's sleep or simply take a moment to relax. If you're enjoying the podcast, please leave a review or a rating. So sit back, take a deep breath, and let me read you an old story. Wherever there is soil, plants grow and produce their kind. And all plants are interesting. When a person makes a choice as to what plants he shall grow in any given place, he becomes a gardener or a farmer. And if the conditions are such that he cannot make a choice, he may adopt the plants that grow there by nature, and by making the most of them may still be a gardener or a farmer in some degree. Every family, therefore, may have a garden. If there is not a foot of land, there are porches or windows. Wherever there is sunlight, plants may be made to grow. And one plant in a tin can may be a more helpful and inspiring garden than a whole acre of lawn and flowers may be to another. The satisfaction of a garden does not depend on the area, nor happily on the cost or rarity of the plants. It depends on the temper of the person. One must first seek to love plants and nature, and then to cultivate the happy peace of mind that is satisfied with little. In the vast majority of cases, a person will be happier if he has no rigid and arbitrary notions, for gardens are moodish, particularly with the novice. If plants grow and thrive, he should be happy. And if the plants that thrive chance not to be the ones that he planted, they are plants nevertheless, and nature is satisfied with them. We are wont to covet the things that we cannot have, but we are happier when we love the things that grow, because they must. A patch of lusty pigweeds, growing and crowding in luxuriant abandon, may be a better and more worthy object of affection than a bed of coluses in which every spark of life and spirit and individuality has been sheared out and suppressed. The man who worries morning and night about the dandelions in the lawn will find great relief in loving the dandelions. Each blossom is worth more than a gold coin, as it shines in the exuberant sunlight of the growing spring, and attracts the insects to its bosom. Little children like dandelions, why may not we? Love the things nearest at hand and love intensely. If I were to write a motto over the gate of a garden, I should choose the remark that Socrates is said to have made as he saw the luxuries in the market. How much there is in the world that I do not want. I verily believe that this paragraph I have just written is worth more than all the advice with which I intend to cram the succeeding pages, notwithstanding the fact that I have most assiduously extracted this advice from various worthy but happily long-forgotten authors. Happiness is a quality of a person, not of a plant or a garden, and the anticipation of joy in the writing of a book may be the reason why so many books on garden making have been written. Of course, all these books have been good and useful. It would be ungrateful at the least for the present writer to say otherwise, but books grow old, and the advice becomes too familiar. The sentences need to be transposed, and the order of the chapters varied, now and then, or interest lags. Or to speak plainly, a new book of advice on handicraft is needed in every decade, or perhaps oftener in these days of many publishers. There's been a long and worthy procession of these handbooks. Gardiner and Hepburn, M. Mahone, Cobbett Original, Pugent, Cobbett Fessenden, Squibb, Bridgman, Sayers, Buist, and a dozen more. Each one a little richer because the others had been written. But even the fact that all books pass into oblivion does not deter another hand from making still another venture. I expect then that every person who reads this book will make a garden or will try to make one. But if only tares grow, roses are desired, I must remind the reader that at the outset I advised pigweeds. The book, therefore, will suit everybody. The experienced gardener, because it will be a repetition of what he already knows. The novice, because it will apply as well to a garden of burdocks as of onions. What is a garden? A garden is the personal part of an estate, the area that is most intimately associated with the private life of the home. Originally, the garden was the area inside the enclosure or the lines of fortification, in distinction from the unprotected area or fields that lay beyond. And this latter area was the particular domain of agriculture. This book understands the garden to be that part of the personal or home premises devoted to ornament and to the growing of vegetables and fruits. The garden, therefore, is an ill-defined domain, but the reader must not make the mistake of defining it by dimensions, for one may have a garden in a flower pot or on 1,000 acres. In other words, this book declares that every bit of land that is not used for buildings, walks, drives, and fences should be planted. What we shall plant, whether sward, lilacs, thistles, cabbages, pears, chrysanthemums, or tomatoes, we shall talk about as we proceed. The only way to keep land perfectly unproductive is to keep it moving. The moment the owner lets it alone, the planting has begun. In my own garden, this first planting is of pigweeds. These may be followed the next year by ragweeds, then by docks and thistles, with here and there a start of clover and grass, and it all ends in June grass and dandelions. Nature does not allow for the land to remain bare and idle. Even the banks where plaster and lath were dumped 2 or 3 years ago are now luxuriant with burdocks and sweet clover, and yet persons who pass those dumps every day say that they can grow nothing in their own yard because the soil is so poor. Yet I venture that those same persons furnish most of the pigweed seed that I use on my own garden. The lesson is that there is no soil where a house would be built so poor that something worthwhile cannot be grown on it. If burdocks will grow, something else will grow. Or if nothing else will grow, then I prefer burdocks to sand and rubbish. The burdock is one of the most striking and decorative of plants, and a good piece of it against a building or on a rough bank is just as useful as many plants that cost money and are difficult to grow. I had a good clump of burdock under my study window, and it was a great comfort, but the man would persist in wanting to cut it down when he mowed the lawn. When I remonstrated, he declared that it was nothing but burdock, but I insisted that so far from being burdock, it was really Lapa Major. Since which time the plant and its offspring have enjoyed his utmost respect, and I find that most of my friends reserve their appreciation of a plant until they have learned its name and its family connections. The dump place that I mentioned has a surface area of nearly 150 square feet, and I find that it has grown over 200 good plants of one kind or another this year. This is more than my garden accomplished in an equal area, with manure and water and a man to help. The difference was that the plants on the dump wanted to grow, and the imported plants in the garden did not want to grow. It was the difference between a willing horse and a bulky horse. If a person wants to show his skill, he may choose the bulky plant, but if he wants fun and comfort in gardening, he would better choose the willing one. I have never been able to find out when the dump burdocks and mustard were planted on the dump, and I'm sure that they were never hoed or watered. Nature practices a wonderfully rigid economy. For nearly half the summer, she even refuses to rain to the plants, but still they thrived. Yet I stayed home from a vacation one summer that I might keep my plants from dying. I've since learned that if the plants in my hardy borders cannot take care of themselves for a time, they are of little comfort to me. The joy of garden making lies in the mental attitude and in the sentiments. Having now discussed the most essential elements of gardening, we may give attention to such major features as the actual way in which a satisfying garden is to be planned and executed. Speaking broadly, a person will get from a garden what he puts into it, and it is of the first importance, therefore, that a clear conception of the work be formulated. I do not mean to say that the garden will always turn out what it was desired it should be, but the failure to turn out properly is usually some fault in the first plan or some neglect in execution. Sometimes the disappointment in an ornamental garden is a result of confusion of ideas as to what a garden is for. One of my friends was greatly disappointed on returning to his garden early in September to find that it was not so full and florious as when he left it in July. He had not learned the simple lesson that even a flower garden should exhibit the natural progress of the season. If the garden begins to show ragged places and to decline in late August or early September, it is what occurs in all surrounding vegetation. The year is maturing. The garden ought to express the feeling of the different months. The falling leaves and expended plants are therefore to be looked on, to some extent at least, as the natural order and destiny of a good garden. These attributes are well exhibited in the vegetable garden. In the spring, the vegetable garden is a model of neatness and precision. The rows are straight, and there is no missing plants. The earth is mellow and fresh. Weeds are absent. One takes his friends to the garden and he makes pictures of it. By late June or July, the plants have begun to sprawl and to get out of shape. The bugs have taken some of them. The rows are no longer trim and precise. The earth is hot and dry. The weeds are making headway. By August and September, the garden has lost its early regularity and freshness. The camera is put aside. The visitors are not taken to it. The gardener prefers to go alone to find the melon or the tomatoes, and he comes away as soon as he has secured his product. Now, as a matter of fact, the garden has been going through its regular seasonal growth. It is natural that it became ragged. It is not necessary that weeds conquer it, but I suspect that it would be a very poor garden, and certainly an uninteresting one, if it retained the dress of childhood at the time when it should develop the personalities of age. There are two types of outdoor garden in which the progress of this season is not definitely expressed: in the carpet bedding kind and in the subtropical kind. I hope that my reader will get a clear distinction in these matters, for it is exceedingly important. The carpet bedding garden is the making of figure beds in house leeks, acaranus and coleus and sanitalia, and other things that can be grown in compact masses and possibly sheared to keep them within place and bounds. The reader sees these beds in perfection in some of the parks and about florists' establishments. He will understand at once that they are not meant in any way to express the season. For the difference between them in September and June is only that they may be more perfect in September. The subtropical gardening is the planting out of house-grown stuff in order to produce given effects. Of such plants, palms, dracaenas, crotons, caladiums, papyrus, together with such luxuriant things as dahlias and carnas, and large ornamental grasses and castor beans. These plants are to produce effects quite foreign to the expression of a northern landscape. They are usually at their best and most luxuriant when overtaken by the fall frosts. Now, the home gardener usually relies on plants that more or less come and go with the seasons. He pieces out and extends the seasons, to be sure. But a garden with pansies, pinks, sweet william, roses, sweet peas, petunias, marigolds, salapiglossus, sweet sultan, poppies, zinnias, asters, cosmos, and the rest. is a progress of the season garden. Nevertheless, and if it is a garden of herbaceous perennials, it still more completely expresses the time of year. My reader will now consider, perhaps, whether he would have his garden accent and heighten his natural year from spring to fall, or whether he desires to thrust into his year a feeling of another order of vegetation. Either is allowable, but the gardener should distinguish at the outset. I wish to suggest to my reader, also, that it is possible for the garden to retain some interest even in the winter months. I sometimes question whether it is altogether wise to clear out the old garden stems too completely and too smoothly in the fall, and thereby obliterate every mark of it for the winters. But however this may be, there are two ways by which the garden year may be extended: by planting things that bloom very late in fall, and others that bloom very early in spring, by using freely in the backgrounds of bushes and trees that have interesting winter characteristics. One cannot expect satisfaction in the planting and developing of a home area unless he has clear conception of what is to be done. This necessarily follows, since the pleasure that one derives from any enterprise depends chiefly on the definiteness of his ideals and his ability to develop them. The homemaker should develop his plan before he attempts to develop his place. He must study the various subdivisions in order that the premises may meet all his needs. He should determine the location of the leading features of the place and the relative importance to be given to the various parts of it. As of the landscape parts, the ornamental areas, the vegetable garden, and the fruit plantation, the details of the planting may be determined in part as the place develops. It is only the structural features and purposes that need to be determined beforehand in most small properties. The incidental modifications that may be made in the planting from time to time keep the interest alive and allow the planter to gratify his desire to experiment new plants and new methods. It must be understood that I am now speaking of ordinary home grounds which the homemaker desires to improve by himself. If the area is large enough to present distinct landscape features, it is always best to employ a landscape architect of recognized merit. In the same spirit that one would employ an architect, the details, however, may even then be filled by the owner, if he is so inclined, following out the plan that the landscape architect makes. It is desirable to have a definite plan on paper, drawn to scale, for the location of the leading features of the place. These features are the residence, the outhouses, the walks and drives, the service areas, the border planting, flower garden, vegetable garden, and fruit garden. It should not be expected that the map plan can be followed in every detail, but it will serve as a general guide. And if it is made on a large enough scale, the different kinds of plants can be located in their proper positions, and a record of the place to be kept. It is nearly always unsatisfactory for both owner and designer if a plan of the place is made without a personal inspection of the area. Lines that look well on a map may not adjust themselves readily to the varying contours of the place itself, and the location of the features inside the grounds will depend also in a very large measure on the objects that lie outside of it. For example, all interesting and bold views should be brought into the place, and all unsightly objects in the immediate vicinity should be planted out. A plan of a backyard of a narrow city lot is exampled, showing the heavy border planting of trees and shrubs with a skirting border of flowers. In the front are 2 large trees that are designed for shade. It will readily be seen from this plan how extensive the area for flower becomes when they are placing along such a devious border. More colour effect can be got from such arrangements of the flowers than can be secured if the whole area were planted to flower beds. A contour map plan of a very rough piece of ground is also exampled. The sides of the place are high, and it becomes necessary to carry a walk through the middle area, and on either side of the front, it skirts the banks. Such a plan is usually unsightly on paper, but may nevertheless fit special cases very well. The plan is inserted here for the purpose of illustrating the fact that a plant that will work on the ground does not necessarily work on a map. In charting a place, it is important to locate the points from which the walks are to start, and at which they are to emerge from the grounds. These 2 points are then joined by direct and simple curves, and along the walks, especially in angles or bold curves, planting may be inserted. A suggestion for school premises on 4 corners, and which the pupils will enter from 3 directions, is also exampled. The 2 playgrounds are separated by a broken group of bushes, extending from the building to the rear boundary. But in general, the spaces are kept open, and the heavy border masses clothe the place and make it home-like. The lineal extent of the group margins is astonishingly large, and all of these margin flowers may be planted if desired. If there is only 6 feet between a schoolhouse and the fence, there is still room for a border of shrub. This border should be between the walk and the fence, on the very boundary, not between the walk and the building. For in the latter case, the planting divides the premises and weakens the effect. A space 2 feet wide will allow of an irregular wall of bushes. If tall buildings do not cut out the light, and if the area is 100 feet long, 30 to 50 kinds of shrubs and flowers can be grown to perfection, and the school grounds will be practically no smaller for the plantation. One cannot make a plan of a place until he knows what he wants to do with the property, and therefore we may devote the remainder of this chapter to developing the idea of the layout of the premises rather than the details of map making and planting. Because I speak of the free treatment of garden spaces in this book, it must not be inferred that any reflection is intended on the formal garden. There are many places in which formal or architect's gardens is much to be desired, but each of these cases should be treated wholly by itself and be made a part of the architectural setting of the place. These questions are outside the sphere of this book. All formal gardens are properly individual studies. All very special types of garden design are naturally excluded from a book of this kind. Such types, for example, as Japanese gardening. Persons who desire to develop these specialities will secure the services of persons who are skilled in them, and there are also books and magazine articles to which they may go. The deficiency in most home grounds is not so much that there is too little planting of trees and shrubs as that this planting is meaningless. Every yard should be a picture, that is, the area should be set off from other areas, and it should have such a character that the observer catches its entire effect and purpose without stopping to analyze its parts. The yard should be one thing, one area, with every feature contributing its part to the strong and homogeneous effect. These remarks will become concrete if the reader turns his eye to the following examples. The former represents a common type of planting of front yards. The bushes and trees are scattered promiscuously over the area. Such a yard has no purpose, no central idea. It shows plainly that the planter had no constructive conception, no grasp of any design, and no appreciation of the fundamental elements of the beauty of landscape. Its only merit is the fact that trees and shrubs have been planted, and this, to most minds, comprises the essence and sum of the ornamentation of grounds. Every tree and bush is an individual alone, unattended, disconnected from its environments, and therefore meaningless. Such a yard is only a nursery. The other plan is a picture. The eye catches its meaning at once. The central idea is the residence, with a free and open greensward in front of it, the same trees and bushes that were scattered haphazard over the other example, amassed into a framework to give effectiveness to the picture of home and comfort. Even though the area be no larger than a parlor, this style of planting makes a landscape. The other style is only a collection of curious plants. The one has an instant and abiding pictorial effect, which is restful and satisfying. The observer exclaims, "What a beautiful home this is." The other piques one's curiosity, obscures the residence, divides and distracts the attention. The observer exclaims, "What excellent lilac bushes are these?" An inquiry into the causes of the unlike impressions that one receives from a given landscape and from a painting of it explains the subject admirably. One reason why the picture appeals to us more than the landscape is because the picture is condensed, and the mind becomes acquainted with its entire purpose at once. While the landscape is so broad that the individual objects at first fix the attention, and it is only by a process of synthesis that the unity of the landscape finally becomes apparent. This is admirably illustrated in photographs. One of the first surprises that the novice experiences in the use of the camera is the discovery that very tame scenes become interesting, and often even spirited in the photograph. But there is something more than mere condensation in this vitalizing and beautifying effect of the photograph or the painting. Individual objects are so much reduced that they no longer appeal to us as distinct subjects, and however uncouth they may be in the reality, they make no impression in the picture. The thin and sere sword may appear rather like a closely shaven lawn or a new-mown meadow, and again, the picture sets a limit to the scene. It frames it and thereby cuts off all extraneous and confusing or irrelevant landscapes. These remarks are illustrated in the aesthetics of landscape gardening. It is the artist's one desire to make pictures in the landscape. This is done in two ways, by the form of plantations and by the use of vistas. He will throw his plantations into such positions that open and yet more or less confined areas of greenwood are presented to the observer at various points. This picture-like opening is nearly or quite devoid of small or individual objects, which usually destroy the unity of such areas and are meaningless in themselves. A vista is a narrow opening or a view between plantations to a distant landscape. It cuts up the broad horizon into portions that are readily cognizable. It frames parts of the countryside. The verdurous sides of the planting are the sides of the frame. The foreground is the bottom and the sky is the top. It is of the utmost importance that good views be left or secured from the best windows of the house, not forgetting the kitchen window. In fact, the placing of the house may often be determined by the views that may be appropriated. If a landscape is a picture, it must have a canvas. This canvas is the greensward. Upon this, the artist paints with tree and bush and flower, as the painter does upon his canvas with brush and pigments. The opportunity for artistic composition and design is nowhere so great as in the landscape garden, because no other art has such a limitless field for the expression of its emotions. It is not strange, if this be true, that there have been few great landscape gardeners, and that falling short of art, the landscape gardener, too, often works in the sphere of the artisan. There can be no rules for landscape gardening, any more than there can be for painting or sculpture. The operator may be taught how to hold the brush, or strike the chisel, or plant the tree, but he remains an operator. The art is intellectual and emotional and will not confine itself in precepts. The making of a good and spacious lawn, then, is the very first practical consideration in the landscape garden. The lawn provided, the gardener conceives what is the dominant and central feature in the place, and then throws the entire premises into subordination of this feature. In home grounds, this central feature is the house. To scatter trees and bushes over the area defeats the fundamental purpose of the place, the purpose to make every part of the grounds lead up to the home and to accentuate its homelikeness.